And then me and Dillon have gotten super close. Loves football. You can tell how seriously he takes it. He's never not studying the playbook.
If you look at our quarterback tracker, he had more pass attempts than anyone by about 20. Gabriel did. His numbers weren't as great as Shedeur's because they were giving him more complicated. They think from the neck up, he is a number one pick.
And he's going to be hard for Shedeur to beat. Browns media is back at it again. They're now claiming that Dillon Gabriel is light years ahead of Shedeur Sanders. And we had this conversation, I think, a few weeks back when TJ Houshmandzadeh, I probably butchered that name, I apologize, stated that people on the inside of the Browns favor Dillon Gabriel. Now, to be honest with you, when you look at it at face value, I think we all have to agree that if they're going to pick somebody before somebody else, they probably prefer that person, the way that they build and stuff like that. But it's so interesting to me as we're going to watch a few of these things, as we're going to read some of these reports of saying how far bad Shedeur is. We had that Mary Kay situation a few days ago where, hey, he just needs to do pre-snap. But it's just, before we get into it, I just want y'all to remember what they were saying when footballs were being thrown. When footballs were being thrown, it was nothing but Shedeur is amazing, Shedeur is amazing, Shedeur is amazing. Now that we have not played football in months or a month or whatever, listen to how people are saying things. I want you to pay attention. Let's start here with some of our favorite, The Riz, out there in Cleveland radio. They're going to start with a few different things about why people in the Browns organization love Dillon Gabriel so much.
There was a report on NFL Network earlier, a couple days ago, that said, quote, oh, the Browns put a lot more on Dillon Gabriel's plate than they anticipated in the OTAs, in the offseason stuff. The number one question is, what's the order? What's the order? We all were off for 4 weeks, 5 weeks. They had their meetings. Give me quarterback 1, 2, 3, and 4 right now when training camp starts on Wednesday. And believe me, folks, Andrew Berry's calling the shots here for that. He is. Now, what happens on the field might be different than what he wants, and I trust the coaches that they would do what's best for the team.
Correct.
But I'm telling you that I believe that Kenny Pickett and Dillon Gabriel are the two guys that I'd be looking at right now to start this season.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that he points out that he thinks Dillon Gabriel and Kenny Pickett should start. Not because I think that's even a negative against Shedeur. I think what the Riz is doing is kind of seeing how the media is being perplexed, how they're positioning themselves right. And I think it's so funny that Joe Flacco has become an afterthought. But when you do think about the last time we saw Joe Flacco with the Colts, it was pretty abysmal, right? So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think when it comes down to it, Joe Flacco is just going to be more of a, if you watch F1, a reserve driver, right? Someone who's just there to offer guidance, and worst case scenario, be a pinch hitter, right? So I think those two revelations are interesting, but I also think it's interesting that someone like Riz doesn't leave the door closed to Shedeur, right? Doesn't mean he can't, but the way people are looking at it, and again, the reports here, we're going to read a little bit of this, right? I remember when Albert Breer had this to say. This is back in June 18th. But again, a flasher back just to remember how things are being talked about. On 92.3 The Fan, discussed why the Browns didn't give Shedeur Sanders any first-team reps. So we just talked about why Dillon got so many first-team reps. This is another thing. Okay, I think Shedeur, this isn't any fault. He had a lot more ground to cover than Dillon Gabriel. Because of that, it's hard to put him out there with the first team. Breer recalled his own reports during the pre-draft process about how Shedeur wasn't up to speed in NFL concepts, despite having Deion and Pat Shurmur coaching him. He had a bigger learning curve than Dillon Gabriel. There were teams that were stunned by how little Shedeur knew relative to what they thought. He was pretty far behind. This would explain why the Browns wanted Shedeur to work separate from the other quarterbacks and get as many practice reps as possible against the backups. I think the reality is he was pretty far behind to begin with. I just think it's interesting. Now, could this be truthful? Yes. Y'all know me. I'm not going, as much as y'all call me Glazer, I'm not saying that we can't come from a world in a Pat Shurmur offense where maybe he didn't have his advanced pre-snap movements. If you saw, there wasn't a lot of motion in that offense. There wasn't a lot of extra things going on. So you watch him pre-snap, it didn't seem like Pat Shurmur was putting even a lot on Shedeur. So I don't think that's his fault. And I really think it's more so offensive line, right? How many slide protections can I put in with an offensive line that is being rotated and trying to grow and trying to find who the real fit is? At one point, you put a walk-on in to serve as your center, right? So I think that with all context there, I understand why he's far behind. And then on top of that, you think about, we talk about how positive it is because of the adversity that Shedeur has gone so many offensive coordinators, but it's adversity. It's something that he has to get through. I have to think that having so many different offensive coordinators has forced him to like just kind of throw out the idea of sticking to one system. Now I know Dillon Gabriel has also had multiple coordinators too, but he also played for 6 years, right? He was at UCF for a total of 3 years. I know he didn't play all 3 years, but he was there in the campus learning the program. He was at Oklahoma for another 2 years. So let's not act like it was a Shedeur Sanders situation where it's every single year completely new offensive scheme. So I think those are interesting tidbits to think about the context of that. But it does not mean that Dillon Gabriel isn't, has an edge. So let's hear more about why they think Dillon Gabriel is a number one pick. Number one pick? When did this go? But it's Tony Grossi, guys. It's Tony Grossi. So you know.
There were reports from NFL Network that the Browns threw a lot on Dillon Gabriel's plate, and the reasoning is that Andrew, in an ideal world, would like this kid to win the job in training camp.
I think
Would you agree with that?
No, I think that's stretching it. I think, if you look at our quarterback tracker, he had more pass attempts than anyone by about 20, Gabriel did. They exposed him to the number one defense. They gave him things. His numbers weren't as great as Shedeur's because they were giving him more complicated stuff.
I will not get caught up in Shedeur's numbers.
Yeah, but that all of that attests to the point that they are intrigued by Dillon Gabriel. They think from the neck up, he is a number one pick from the
neck up. Obviously, from the neck down, he's not much of a number one pick. Even though I do think the kid's got some wheels on him. The gentleman, I gotta stop calling him kids. I'm not talking about high school or college players anymore. Look. I think, again, interesting. I just want to point things out to you, right? I want to point out the fact that he had to bring up, well, the reason Shedeur Sanders' numbers were better. Look, don't do that. We don't need to do that. Now, is Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur going to be basically tied at the hip, most likely for the rest of their career after this situation? Probably. But if we're going to give Dillon Gabriel praise, can we just give Dillon Gabriel praise? Right? I don't understand why in injunction we have to then say, well, Shedeur isn't this and he isn't that. And the only reason was it's like, no, if they're intrigued with him, talk about his lightning, quick processing speed. Talk about how he ran a lot of RPOs at Oregon, a lot of RPOs at UCF and Oklahoma. He ran a lot of high octane offenses that didn't translate well to the NFL. You can say these things about Dillon Gabriel. I just don't know why we need to defend from the Shedeur mob, as Tony Grossi says. It's like, dog, if you were to just speak about Shedeur as an entity, hey, this is what he does good, this is what he doesn't do good, and we need to see him against first-team reps, I don't know how many people can be mad, sane people can be mad at that. But then if you then go say, oh, but Dillon Gabriel is better and he's ahead, and just so y'all know, they like him more, it's like, dog, we get it. We understand. At one point, are we going to just say Dillon Gabriel is a guy and he stands on his own two legs instead of trying to make these odd comparisons of what he is? And let's talk about it, right? And to do so, let's speak about the man that Shedeur Sanders, everybody's favorite, the people's QB1. You feel me? Everybody wants him to be there, but I don't want y'all to think, like I've made multiple videos, Dillon Gabriel ain't no slouch now. I don't want y'all to think that he's just some dude, right? And this is a small little profile, right? And this is following up on this idea that, hey, people were blown away by Dillon Gabriel's processing speed. This was an early scouting report about him, right? I actually watched a decent amount of Gabriel play while he was at UCF. He was impressive arm strength, but he is smaller than most would like, 5'11", 205. He tied Case Keenum for the most passing touchdowns in college history. We got to remember that. He left UCF after 2 strong years and landed with Oklahoma for 2 years. And finally at Oregon, he's another lefty quarterback, similar to Tua and Michael Penix. He's no slouch, and as he actually finished ahead of Cam Ward Heisman voting in 3rd place. He can sling it and kind of remind some people like Bryce Young. I'm going to have to stop you there. I see what you say, like Bryce Young, and maybe this is just because people, I feel like everyone has a tendency to not favor left-handed quarterbacks. We have to get that bias out just because our right-handed supremacy is how we feel, right? So it's going to look weird from the left hand, but just the way, like Bryce Young, not to say Dillon Gabriel isn't efficient, because that's why he got drafted in the Kevin Stefanski offense. That's what he does best. He delivers, he dinks and dunks. But Bryce Young did it. He has another level of touch. He has another level of, right, in the way that I think Dillon Gabriel has the edge in velocity, I think Shedeur Sanders has the edge in touch and placement. I think Bryce Young had both of those things, and I think we're starting to see that. Y'all do not disrespect my man Bryce Young, right? Because he was dealing in college. He was running the most one of the most efficient offenses in college football history. It seems like he would always make the right decision. So not to say that Dillon Gabriel isn't good at decision making, but let's not Bryce Young him, all right? He's super accurate, of course, and could manage to cut through the chaos and actually start in the crazy quarterback room for the Browns. Injury-wise, Gabriel suffered a season-ending left clavicle fracture. What? In the third game of the season for UCF in 2021. After that, he only missed one more due to a concussion in 2022. Right now, early July, the Browns quarterback situation is a hot mess, so trying to figure out which quarterback to draft is silly. I would wait until the dust settles in redraft leagues. And he's talking about a little. This is for like fantasy draft. It's so funny. I get a lot of intel from fantasy draft people because I promise you, there's nobody who does more research on football players than fantasy football people, dog. There's no analyst, there's no insider, there's not even a scout, there's not an NFL scout that does more research than fantasy football scouts. All right, so just to let you know, right? So putting all this in perspective, right? And then we already talked about this. Tony Grossi, he's a neck up, right? Blown away. Everybody's saying how blown away he is. And actually, before we get into that, let's get into two things. Let's get into the actual quote of that, right? Here it is.
Well, if we believe the language that they use going back to the spring, they're going to value processing time, decision making, that kind of thing. They want somebody who's going to be able to run the offense, minimize mistakes, make good decisions, things like that. They use those words a lot, processing speed and decision making, when they talked about Dillon Gabriel, especially in the spring. Don't forget, he has a whole lot of experience from college football, 6 years worth. So they were impressed with his processing speed to the point where they said, like in the spring, they were putting more on his plate than they initially thought they were going to do for him. They kept giving him more information because he was absorbing it so much. Now, of course, when you look at Joe Flacco, there's no question they know how he processes things and how he runs the offense because he's already done it. They went to a playoff with Joe Flacco. So the spring was mostly about just putting Joe Flacco to the side, getting Kenny Pickett up to speed on this offense, which he has not played in before, and then getting the rookies going. But if you're looking at the quarterback competition, it's really two quarterback competitions, the competition between the two rookies and then the competition between the two veterans. Certainly, I think at this early point, you would say Joe Flacco has to have the edge just because he's been there and won there. And then I think you keep an eye on Dillon Gabriel, who I think caught some eyes in the spring with how quickly he was absorbing information.
Well, what you just said, Judy, about the competition between the veterans and the competition between the rookies, because you're not keeping four quarterbacks. You've got four on the roster here, so you've got those two. You traded for Kenny Pickett to then just get rid of him. Doesn't make much sense. So you've got those two. Who's the one? Who's the two? And then which one are you keeping on the roster? Potentially could keep the fourth on the practice squad. You could have four quarterbacks in the building, just not necessarily on the roster.
And that's that little snippet there. So that was the original quote, kind of what started all this, right? And just to substantiate that, because we also, anytime we make Shedeur videos, we talk about how positive his teammates talk about him. Don't forget that Luke Floria, right, who is seemingly be Shedeur and them. I just want to say that's a special connection. There seems to be a special connection between Luke Floria, undrafted free agent, a guy that makes big catches in big moments and big times, trying to make the team. What does he have to say about Dillon Gabriel?
And then me and Dillon have gotten super close over these last couple of weeks. He's a ball guy through and through. You know, he loves football. You can tell how seriously he takes it. He's never not studying the playbook, never not looking at his stuff, and that gives you confidence as a receiver because you know he's going to go in there and put you in the right spot and put you where you need to be, not put you in harm's way or anything.
Hey man, look, as much as I think we want to continue, or not think, I know that we're going to continue to sing the praises of 12 and the great things that he's going to do. Let's know that he ain't going against no slouch, right? He is not going against any sort of slouch. Dillon Gabriel has the respect of the locker room in maybe not the same fashion because, you know, Shedeur seems to have the community and the locker room behind him. Dillon Gabriel certainly has some of those people in the locker room. He certainly has a good connection with the wide receivers and is starting to grow as a leader, which at the end of the day, that's what a quarterback is, right? A leader of men amongst men. So I think that's super dope. So let's I'm not going to bore your head anymore. I think we've heard a lot of different situations. I do want to hear this one last video. Then we're going to get into some bag work to show you what it looks like on film because there's been some conflicting reports, right? We've talked about how all of a sudden everybody says, hey, Dillon Gabriel, and it really started here with TJ Houshmandzadeh, right? We're not going to play this one, but we're going to play this one because it seems like on that same trade aspect, people are saying Kenny Pickett is the trade aspect, and Dillon and Shedeur Sanders is the guy. We'll see. Let's see.
Quarterback Shedeur Sanders will be the Cleveland Browns starter by their Week 9 bye week. You heard it. Look, they got a lot of quarterbacks in that building. But I think that the voice from the fans is going to get louder and louder as the season goes on. I think we know who Kenny Pickett is. We know who Joe Flacco is. And I think Shedeur supplants Dillon Gabriel.
Start him sooner. You have 2 first-round picks next year. You need to know what you have in Shedeur Sanders. He's a better prospect than Dillon Gabriel, their 3rd-round pick. Trade Kenny Pickett. Joe Flacco is your bridge quarterback. Let's see what we have in Shedeur, who's a very talented quarterback.
I like that, and I think he should start earlier. Obviously, you're going to start with the veteran to see what this team has.
Is that Ryan Clark?
As the season progresses, as you start to be more comfortable with Shedeur Sanders at practice and the way that he's handling himself in the building, he should become the starter because you need to know if he could be your guy going forward.
Now, I want to preface this by understanding that, the national media, obviously, we went first local media, then local reporters on national media, and then we ended with national media favoring Shedeur Sanders over Dillon Gabriel. I think a lot of people, when they first hear that, right, we can't be dumb and just be like, oh, well, everybody loves Shedeur. We have to understand that the national media, right, that the Get Up, the ESPNs, they're looking for ratings, right? Stephen A. Smith don't know what he's talking about when he talks about football, right? He's just there to yell about it and talk about the popularity. So we do have to take that with a grain of salt, knowing that the more marketable name to speak about is going to be Shedeur Sanders. If Shedeur Sanders starts for the Browns, dog, it's an instant 100K, instant so many viewers for ESPN because they can speak about somebody who has now already been integrated in the community, already has a name, already bigger than life, already has a story behind him, right? But Dillon Gabriel, like Luke Floria says, he's just a ball guy, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to make sure that we point that out as much as it's going to feel like a competition, and it will be a competition between Shedeur and Dillon Gabriel. If you're a ball lover, you should hope that whoever plays the best ball gets through, but still understand the bias on both sides, right? There's a Shedeur bias, right? Of, hey, Shedeur's just going to be the better prospect, right? Where there was no deeper breaking down. There was no linking of, well, why do we think that? Why, do we have any reports? Have we heard anything, right? And then when it comes from the local media, they're just seemingly reporting what it feels like from internal wise, right? There's a lot more nuance to what the local media is saying. So I would have to think that there is some reality to the fact that, hey, they like Dillon Gabriel, but again, like we talked about, that shouldn't surprise nobody. They drafted him first. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So they were going into the draft thinking they could have a Dillon Gabriel. They clearly, and Andrew Berry has said this, they didn't go in the draft thinking they would even have a chance at a Shedeur Sanders. So I think that is a clear and obvious difference there. And just to highlight, I talk about this a lot, or these two things a lot, but I do want it to be pointed out that Dillon Gabriel is both marketable and he be giving back to the community. So I know he's not out there in the Cleveland community, which, hey, I would get out there, Dillon. Let us know. But he is giving back to his alma mater with custom Jordan uniforms. We talked about this before. And then he's getting a Pacifica deal. He just got a deal with Pacifica. If you don't know, throughout his Oregon days, he rode around in Pacifica, even with NIL deals, big van boys. So I do want to make sure as we get back into training camp, as this starts to heat up and as this competition gets competitive, look, Dillon Gabriel is a guy, and he's a football guy, and he's going to be hard for Shedeur to beat, not just because of how seemingly biased some of the Cleveland media is, but also because this dude's a baller, right? And he knows how to get it done. But y'all let me know who will win. Do you think the Browns are just going to go double rookies and let them battle out? Do you think they're just waiting for their next double first-round picks? You got Nussmeier coming up next year. That could be a probably decent pickup for the Browns. Y'all let me know down below in the comments. Like the video if you like it, dislike if you don't. Subscribe if you enjoy college football, all different types of football coverage. We'll see you next time, man. Peace.